Boker Tov, Erev Tov. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us here on our Zoom call on Facebook for this wonderful program that we're about to embark upon on intersection of Jewish and Argentinian identities. I'm Tammy Benheim. I'm the Minister for Public Diplomacy here in Washington, D.C. in the Israeli Embassy to the U.S. And, we're super excited, and I'm also personally and professionally happy to cooperate with the Embassy of Argentina, who we've had events with in the past, and they're always good. And we always see, how close we are and how alike we are on so many things. So this is just another opportunity to talk about it and discover. And especially thank you to Sebastián De Luca, the head of cultural affairs and public diplomacy in the Embassy of Argentina, who's been bearing with us on this issue and many, and it's always a pleasure. And thank you also to Adriana Camisar from Birth International, who will be our moderator today. And of course, to the two esteemed professors that we have with us, Professor Raanan Rein from Tel Aviv University in Israel, and Professor Saul Sosnowski from the University of Maryland, my alma mater. So I'm very excited, and we all are, to hear you. And just shout outs to my wonderful public diplomacy team here at the embassy as well. And I pass the mic on happily to Sebastián.
Thank you very much, Tammy. It's a pleasure finally to be here doing this event. This is a little comment. When I arrived to Washington 2 years ago at the embassy, I met Tammy and we started thinking about ideas of working together. So I'm happy that after a good event already, well, last year with COVID, we could not do what we had planned, but then we're starting at least in a virtual mode right now. So I'm very happy to be here with you organizing this event. It's a pleasure for the Embassy of Argentina, of course, having the chance to organize this event with the Embassy of Israel. And I will be presenting the distinguished moderator and panelists. Adriana Camisar has been Brief International Special Advisor for Latin America and United Nations since 2008. She's an attorney by training and a native of Salta, Argentina, where she currently resides. Adriana has a master's degree in international affairs from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Professor Raanan Rein is the author and editor of more than 40 books and well over 100 articles in academic journals and book chapters in several languages. He is a member of Argentina's National Academy of History and former president of the Latin American Jewish Studies Association. The Argentine government awarded him the title of Commander in the Order of the Liberator of San Martin for his contribution to Argentine culture. The Spanish king awarded him the title of Commander in the Order of the Civil Merit. In 2016, he won the Reimer Lust Award, co-sponsored by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and Fritz Thyssen Foundation. In 2017, the city of Buenos Aires declared him as a guest of honor. His research interests are modern Latin America, populist movements, Argentine society and politics, Jews in Spanish-speaking world, ethnic minorities in Latin America, immigration, collective identities, 20th century Spain, and something to do with soccer, I believe. The Elías, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that Professor Raanan is the Elías Sourasky Professor of Latin American Spanish History and former Vice President of the Tel Aviv University. And good morning, Saul Sosnowski is a close friend of the Argentine Embassy. We have the pleasure of working with him in many projects. He's Professor of Latin American Literature and Culture, founder and former director of the Latin American Studies Center, and founder and editor of Hispamérica, Revista de Literatura. I'm sorry. He's the author of books on Borges, Cortázar, Argentine Jewish writers, fascism, Nazism in Argentine letters, editor or co-editor of over 15 volumes, including several on the repression of culture and the role of culture in the redemocratization of the Southern Cone countries. His most recent publications, Ad Rugido, that Rugido. Que toda la palabra cubre. Poetry. It's poetry book,
Digo
sorry.
que toda palabra cubre.
It was in Spanish, so the mix. Well, Living Landscape in Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay, published by Oxford University Press, that will be released in Spanish by Eudeba later this year. Last year, he published the novel Decir Berlín, Decir Buenos Aires. His next novel will be published later this year. Sosnowski is the founder and editor of the literary journal Hispamérica, but I think I already said that, and currently is the 50th year of continuous publication. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll give you the floor, Adriana. It's a pleasure to have the chance to be with you.
Thank you so much, Sebastián. And it is a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to moderate this very interesting panel. It's particularly interesting to me as I'm a native of Argentina and I'm also Jewish. So I'm sure it will be a fascinating event. Professor Rein and Professor Sosnowski, thank you so much for being with us today. We are also thrilled to have you. And I would like to start this conversation by asking Professor Rein, what motivated the Jewish people to migrate and why many of them moved to Latin America and particularly to Argentina? Perhaps you can give us a brief overview.
Thank you, Adriana. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this virtual meeting. Just a personal note to start with, I'm the only non-Argentine in this panel. Although, if it counts, I'm married to an Argentine, and this certainly has helped to strengthen my ties to Argentina, its people, and its culture. When one talks about migration, or she should look at both push factors and pull factors. That is, why people decide to abandon their homes and look for a better future elsewhere, and why do they choose a specific place to go. We also need to take into account that Jewish immigration to the Americas was part of a larger transatlantic migration of the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. In fact, due to the demographic revolution in Europe, millions and millions of people were on the move, either within the European continent or without, looking for a better future overseas, especially in the New World, either in North America or in South America. More specifically, when talking about Jews, and especially the Jews of the Pale of Settlement, nowadays Poland and Russia, due to physical harassment, due to economic hardship, and other challenges that they had to deal with, they were looking for other places. Just to give you an example as to the challenges they had to face, let's take the year 1905, following the defeat of Russia in its war with Japan. There were a series of pogroms in at least 600 cities and towns, and therefore there were fear of violence, no personal security, and Jews were looking for other places. Argentina seemed very attractive for very many reasons, and I could also mention the fact here that if one remembers the most famous book of Theodor Herzl, Judestaat, the Jewish state, in this book published in 1896, Herzl talks about the opportunity facing East European Jews, Palestine or the Argentine. So Argentina was well on the table as an option for Jewish immigration. Now, looking at the specific Argentine context, Argentina was a rather unimportant colony of Spain until the late 18th century. It was only after it was declared a viceroyalty that it gradually acquired importance. But still, even after its independence, Buenos Aires was a minor commercial port. Still, in the middle of the 19th century, Argentine elites made a strategic decision to encourage immigration to Argentina. Many of the viewers know the saying by Alberti, gobernar es poblar. And in fact, they managed to attract a large number of immigrants from different parts of Europe, mostly Spain, Italy, but also many Jews. And by the beginning of the 20th century, Jews were already the largest non-Catholic group in Argentina. Argentina had a liberal constitution with freedom of worship, with a state secular education, and Jews believed that they could indeed have a better future there. And indeed, for hundreds of thousands of Jews, Argentina became the promised land. We know that there's a certain image of Argentina in different parts of the world, but Jews had integrated successfully into Argentine society. And Buenos Aires, if I may say, became gradually the most Jewish city in the world outside Israel and New York City. So maybe I'll stop here and then we can continue the discussion.
Thank you for this wonderful overview. And now a question for Professor Sosnowski. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how these Jewish immigrants managed to keep their Jewish traditions when they came to Argentina and throughout the years.
Well, to pick up on what Raanan just said, in terms of Buenos Aires becoming a Jewish center, all we have to do is take a look at when the IVO was established. The IVO branch was established in Buenos Aires, and also the fact that Buenos Aires was one of the major publishing venues for books in Yiddish and later in Hebrew also. Just a personal note, I just remembered that, for example, the printer who handled my journal Hispamérica for the first 22 issues that were printed in Buenos Aires also was printing books in Yiddish. And it was very funny to see the lithographs, and not the lithograph, wrong word, the typesetting going in one way for the Spanish and in another way for the books in Yiddish. But anyway, the thing is that Argentina was a major center. It was a major center for Jewish education. Let's remember that for many, many years, and even until today, Argentina is a point of export for Jewish teachers, for Hebrew teachers, for rabbis, for cantors, and so on. Although the community has changed significantly over the years, it still remains a major center within Latin America. And if you take a look at the world, Buenos Aires continues to be a focal point for that. In terms of integration, there was an effort to integrate, where there was a project of integration. If we go in terms of how it is expressed in literature, we always remember a book called Los Gauchos Judíos, the 1910 publication by Alberto Gerchunov, who was born in Eastern Europe, and who in fact published that book in time for the first centennial of our independence. And what you will find there is the effort, in spite of every single obstacle, there was an effort to be an Argentine and be recognized as such. To the point that Gerchunov speaks about the fact that we were exiled from the Spanish language since 1492, but we are recovering our own language. Namely, we are not foreigners coming into the Spanish language, we're just retrieving what is already ours. And that is also something that you will find as you go through every single year of the Argentine Jewish literary scene, since then and until today. But maybe we can explore that later on.
Yeah, Adriana, if I can add a comment here, because somebody sent me a message on my cell phone complaining about the fact that I mentioned only Ashkenazi Jews in Argentina and ignored Sephardic Jews. And indeed, the majority of Jews in Argentina are of Ashkenazi origins. However, among the first Jews to immigrate to Argentina were Jews from Spanish Morocco.
Right.
And later on, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was suffering from a profound crisis, which led to the persecution of religious minorities, forced military service, and economic hardships. And thousands of Jews from Syria, Lebanon, other parts of the Middle East also found their way to Argentina. So when we talk about the Jewish community of Argentina, we always need to remember that it's a mosaic of Jews from different places, including Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, Communist Jews, Zionists, people of different shades and colors, and this what makes the Jewish community of Argentina so fascinating to somebody like myself.
And with regard to what you just said, it's interesting that most Sephardic Jews in Argentina are called Turks here, probably
from the Ottoman Empire. Yeah.
Right.
Or they came with a Turkish passport, of course.
With a Turkish passport, right? And Professor Sosnowski, let me ask a follow-up question. You mentioned that these immigrants really tried very hard to become Argentines and to integrate, but how do you reconcile that with, you know, their efforts also to keep their Jewish traditions?
That's a very good point that you raise. There is no contradiction there. Let's take a look at...
I'm sorry, I ask you that because, for example, my grandparents spoke Yiddish very well. My parents don't. And I think they didn't want to teach them because they wanted their kids to be completely integrated into the Argentine society. And so something was lost in the process.
They made a major mistake. But at any rate, this is a common pattern. You see that in the United States also, in terms of being forced to forget where they came from and just teaching them the language of the new country. But what's interesting is that the grandchildren are picking that up. So I wouldn't be surprised if you enroll in a course in Yiddish to pick up what your parents didn't give you. But Raanan wants to say something.
This is very characteristic of most immigrant societies of the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And even here in Israel, Jews who made Aliyah or relocated to Israel were supposed to leave behind all the cultural heritage that they brought with them in order to become Israelis. So people changed their names into Hebrew names. People started speaking Hebrew and forgot the Yiddish or Arabic or Persian or whatever other language. So in this sense, Argentina is like other immigrants.
That's right. Well, there is an example, for example, in the US, many Jews who were naming their children Irving, thinking that that was a very waspy name. And they named so many of them that Irving has become a Jewish name now. So, but it is part of the transition that is exercised by migrants everywhere. Okay, I have students who are Latinos and they're talking among themselves in English. And one of the students, Latino surname, he tells me his name is Albert. I said, why Albert and not Alberto? Because my parents want me, etc. So this is a process that is common in terms of Jews being also Argentine or Argentine Jews. This is part of our normal pattern. One thing does not deny the other. So even if you do not talk the language in which your grandparents were born, it does not take away from the Jewishness or Judaism in whatever version you decide to adopt.
I would certainly love to learn Yiddish.
Good. My parents spoke Yiddish at home, and I grew up bilingual, Yiddish and Spanish, and that has allowed me to travel throughout the world and knowing, like I heard a little anecdote told by Danny Goldman in one of his presentations. You go from one place to the other and you talk Yiddish because everybody talks Yiddish. But anyway, you are using a transnational language, the same way that Spanish is now, okay? It is the language that binds us together.
Professor Rein, you wanted to add something?
I wanted to say that each one of us, each individual, has a mosaic of identity components. And undoubtedly, Jewish Argentines have a very strong Argentine component, but they might have a very strong ethnic identity as Jews. And this might be expressed in many ways, in the use of certain Hebrew words, in religious practices, in food ways, cultural ways, etc., etc. There's no one way to be an Argentine. There's no one way to be Jewish. Each individual elaborates her own identity.
We have several common friends who made Aliyah and didn't change their names, or there were people who changed the last name, but the Spanish name, the first name has remained as such. And I know cases like that in the US of people who are pronouncing their name, which could be, for example, Fabian, could easily be adjusted to Fabian. And no, a close friend of ours, it continues to be Fabian. Namely, the Argentine weighs as much as the other identities of which we are part. There is no question about that.
And those identities actually enrich us, I think.
Of course.
Nothing to hide. Let's move
By
to
the contrary, yes.
Yes, I'd like to move to Israel for a moment and ask Professor Rein, how do Jewish Argentines that move to Israel manage to integrate? Do they, try to integrate into communities that remind them of home? And this is two questions in one, but what influence do Argentine Jews or Latin Americans in general have in Israel today?
Well, the short answer is that they managed to very well integrate themselves into Israeli society. But let's start with numbers. When we talk about Israeli citizens of Latin American origin, we are talking about something like 70,000 Israelis. With their children, the number might go up to 150,000. It's a small number, but still the Latin American presence, more specifically the Argentine presence, is very visible in Israel in very many ways. Historically speaking, there were very few Jewish Argentines who relocated to Israel during the first decade of its existence. All in all, between 1948 and 1960, only 6,000 Jewish Argentines relocated to Israel. However, in the 1960s and 1970s, a larger number arrived, about 20,000 each decade. Why did Jewish Argentine make Aliyah or move to Israel? Traditional historiography tend to say basically because of ideological reasons, that is because they were Zionists. And I would say yes, but most people decide to move to a different country either for economic reasons or for political reasons. If we look at the 1960s and the 1970s, a cycle of economic crisis, for example, pushed Jewish Argentines outside of Argentina, to the US, to other Latin American countries, and to the state of Israel. There was, of course, a wave of anti-Semitism in Argentina following the kidnapping of the Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1960. And in the 1970s, unfortunately, due to the military dictatorship, there were Jews looking for a safe place in Israel. In the 1980s, the numbers go down with the re-democratization of Argentina. In the 1990s, the numbers are small because of new economic policies, etc. And then you have another peak in the 2000, 2001 due to the financial crisis in Argentina. So the motivation might be ideological as well, but mostly economic if you talk to the new immigrants here. And there's an interesting phenomenon that we should always remember, the phenomenon of return migration. There are thousands of Jewish Argentines who had relocated to Israel and then after a certain time period went back to Argentina. So we are talking about Jewish Argentines who have an Israeli chapter in their biography, and this is an important group that we should take into account as well. Two more points that I would like to make. There was never a wave of immigration from Argentina. It's a kind of a cumulative immigration, and therefore they had no dramatic impact on Israeli society. Let's compare them to Jews from the former Soviet Union, for example. Then we had a massive wave of immigration, which had a large impact on Israeli society. Let's look about Jews from Ethiopia. Again, they came at a certain time period, and there was a major impact on Israeli society. In the case of Jewish Argentines, it was a slow, cumulative migration. And also, if we look at residential patterns, there's no specific concentration of Jewish Argentines in Israel. This means that on the one hand, they are distributed all along the country, and therefore you see them everywhere. But at the same time, or on the other hand, it was more difficult for them to collectively assert themselves. So individually, they did very well. Collectively, for example, they never felt the need to form a political party, unlike immigrants from the Soviet Union or the former Soviet Union, or if we go back to the 1950s, unlike Sephardic Jews. Jewish Argentines in Israel never needed such a political party because they individually succeeded that way. And then everything to do with Latin America in general, but Argentina in particular, is very popular in Israel. I mean, you see it. You see Israeli youngsters going as mochileros to Argentina after they complete their military service. You see young kids following Argentine telenovelas. Argentine music is very popular. You can find asado or empanadas in different places. You have the Evita gay bar in Tel Aviv and the Che Guevara bar in Rishon LeZion, etc., etc. So as one of the people I interviewed for research of myself, it's cool to be Latino in Israel.
That's very interesting to know. Thank you. It was a wonderful explanation. And I'd like to ask a last question to Professor Sosnowski, and then perhaps open the floor for questions, because I'm seeing many questions from the people that are watching us. The question for you, Saul, is many Jewish Argentinians and Latin Americans in general are moving to the US and also to Israel. And how do you foresee that they will manage to keep their Latin American roots? You already mentioned something about this.
The part of the answer is in your question. You didn't talk about branches, you talked about roots. And you do not take those out. You have to make a special effort to cancel that. I don't want to generalize because I don't have numbers of how many Argentine Jews are in this country. I know that there are large communities. In fact, in the Washington area, we have quite a few because of professional reasons, the international aspect of the city, and so on. And there are other conglomerates in other cities, as you can imagine, Miami, which is a shopping center for many people, or at least it was at one point. And you have it again in LA and so on. But people are somehow integrating without losing that element of where we came from. And this is particularly notable in the sense that, for better or for worse, we do not want to be confused with the general label of Latino, Hispano, and that oftentimes Argentines are not recognized as Latinos by other Latinos in this country, like you belong to another club. And for example, the Washington area, which is where I live, the majority of the immigrants are Central American. And they came here and they continue to come here under duress. And that constitutes a separate challenge for integration, whereas the Argentines who have come here have followed a different pattern. So we cannot generalize in terms of that, and as for futurology, I leave that up to the historians. They can make up the future. But we can see only what is happening right now, and the integration is being done at multiple levels. Like you started indicating, we're the product of multiple identities. I would add shifting identities. And those are markers. We do not erase where we came from. We just add another layer to what we are doing at this time.
Well, thank you so much. And let me see, I have several questions here, but let me read one of them because we won't be able to read everything. This is a question from Anna. She says, not too many people are aware of the immigration to Argentina in the early 1900s, but Jews from Eastern Europe, many who tried to come to the United States but were unable to get in, so they ended up in Argentina. Can one of the panelists elaborate on that? Not sure who wants to respond to that question.
Raanan is ready to jump in.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Saul would be able to add to this or complete my initial reply. The US was the first choice for very many European immigrants, Jews and non-Jews alike. However, there were more restrictions on immigration in the US since the late 19th century, and especially in the interwar period. And therefore, the interwar period is a time of relatively large Jewish immigration from Poland, especially to Argentina. And this immigration continued almost until the late 1930s. By the late 1930s, Argentina decided to close its gates, like most other countries. Unfortunately, in the Evian Conference of 1938, Argentina said that it was not able to accept or admit more Jews into the country. Still, if we look at the time period of the Third Reich between 1933 to 1945, more Jewish immigrants entered Argentina than any other country but Palestine, at the time still under British rule, legally or illegally. Yes, the US was the first choice for very many immigrants, but due to restrictions, many of them turned their eyes to Argentina. At the same time, since there had been immigration before, there was already a network of family relatives or people from the same shtetl or the same town or the same region. So there was a Landsmannschaft of the people from this place in Galicia or that place, and they helped other people come to Argentina as well.
It is the pattern that continues to be with all migrations. And we see that happening right now with all kinds of groups. People migrate to where they have some connections. And that's how they create those pockets that later can blossom into something else. And Florida, if you want to, is a case in point without having to address the Jewish component. That is the usual pattern of migration. Yes, indeed.
Thank you both. I have another question here that says, can you say something about the Syrian or the Mizrahi Sephardic immigration to Argentina?
Yes, I did said something about this. Indeed, from the late 19th century onward, we see a stream of immigrants coming from the Middle East, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, going to the Americas in general, but to the Rio de la Plata region as well, especially Argentina, but also to Brazil, where you have a fairly large community of Syrian Lebanese origins. And in Argentina, at the beginning, you see Jewish immigrants feeling more comfortable with Christian and Muslim immigrants from Syria and Lebanon than from Ashkenazi Jews from Poland or from Russia. After all, they speak the same language, they are used to the same food, they listen to the same sounds, they are used to the same smells, etc., etc. And when we think about Jewish-Arab relations in Argentina, for sure during the first half of the 20th century, they were extremely good. If you look at the names of the members of board of directors of the Diario Syrio-Libanese or Club Syrio-Libanese, you will see both Christian, Jews, and Muslim immigrants there. But going back to what Saul said earlier, you did see how Jews from Damascus had at first their own association, and Jews who came from Aleppo had their own association. So the idea of, let's say, Syrian migration is a bit artificial at the beginning, because each group stayed with the people it related more closely to. Although Jews, Sephardic Jews in general, Jews from Syria and Lebanon in particular, were always a minority within a minority in Argentina, still, if we look at the 1970s, 80s, 90s, they rose to prominent positions within the organized Jewish community, but in the Argentine society at large.
Very interesting. I have another question here. If any of you have an idea of how many Argentinian Jews make Aliyah, I imagine this is in the present, if it's higher or lower percentage than other countries.
Yours, Raanan.
I'm not sure I'm able to answer the question. I don't have the data for the past 2 or 3 years. We do see a constant stream of immigrants from Argentina to Israel, even during this time of pandemic. But the numbers are not very large. If you put some pressure on me, I would say that in the expected economic crisis following this pandemic, we will see a larger number of Jewish Argentines relocating to Israel.
Probably. I'm reading another question here from Deborah. Do speakers have comments on the difference between Jewish community in the US and Argentina?
or the organization is radically different. Let me go back in time a little bit. In terms that in Argentina, we used to be affiliated, if at all affiliated, through various movements, usually ideological movements that were following the Israeli pattern. So even, for example, in the building of schools and the maintenance of different Jewish public schools, it was done along which school belonged to Mapai, which school belonged to another group, the left and so on, and even the political organization of the mutual societies followed that Israeli political pattern. In the United States, the Jewish communities are mostly affiliated with synagogues. The synagogue, the temple is the center of interaction, not just for religious performances, but particularly for social events and so on. So yes, it's radically different. Of course, from the moment that Marshall Mayer, Zichrono Livracha, arrived in Argentina and built Betel and built the conservative movement in Argentina, that has changed. And in some cases, you will find patterns that do follow similar lines to what you may find here. But that is a relatively recent historically, because Marshall Mayer arrived in 1959, if I'm not mistaken, to Buenos Aires. But yes, it did follow different patterns, yes.
Thank you, and you're absolutely right. I noticed that difference when I was living in the US. I found a very interesting question here from Christine. It says, my parents immigrated to Argentina in 1947 under false identity papers as Polish Catholics. I was raised as a Polish Catholic and only recently, 5 years ago, learned that my parents were Jews. I imagine that they were not the only Eastern European Jews at the time hiding their identity. Is there any more information about this particular group?
I cannot evaluate how large this group was, but indeed there were still restrictions on Jewish immigration to Argentina at the end of World War II. And if we remember who was the head of the Dirección de Migraciones, the Migration Authority of Argentina, Santiago Peralta, in 1946, 1947, he was an anti-Semite and of course did its best to put obstacles on Jewish immigration to Argentina. So there were cases of people who tried to assume a different identity in order to facilitate their entry into Argentina. This did not last long because Peralta was out of office by 1948, and then it became easier for Holocaust survivors to find their way into Argentina. But yeah, through the period between, let's say, 1938 and 1947, about 10 years, it was more difficult for Jews to enter Argentina. Some tried to do it illegally through neighboring countries, for example, and others, like this specific case, had to assume a false identity.
And that's very unfortunate because it was after the Holocaust, right? So the worst time.
Yeah, this is a tragedy, no doubt about it.
I have another question here from Nadia. It says, how the Jewish immigrants adopted and integrated the cuisine in Argentina? What are the most popular dishes? Can you get a choripan or dulce de leche in Israel?
So you want to start?
Well, she's asking about whether you can get a choripan y dulce de leche in Israel. So the answer is absolutely yes, you can get it in Washington, D.C. also.
In many Israeli supermarkets, you can get dulce de leche, yes, easily. When it comes to choripan, you have all versions, kosher versions or non-kosher versions, but yes, you can have a choripan here as well. But you do see immigrants in each and every country adapting their traditional cuisine into the new local circumstances as far as the ingredients they can use or what's considered more or less tasteful in the new host country. So Eastern European Jews in Argentina had to adapt their varenikes or cliches into Argentine circumstances, and Jewish Argentines who have relocated to Israel also have to juggle and create the new Argentine Israeli cuisine.
5 minutes, let me just add, 5 minutes from where I live, you have a place called El Patio. And if you want to feel very much at home, you can go there and have a full lunch or dinner that follows our traditions. And if you want to buy dulce de leche, dulce de batata, de membrillo, or take a torta pascualina home, you can do it. This is not a paid commercial, by the way, just to reply to your question.
And I've been there, it's very good.
Okay.
I have another question here. In her new book, The Other Argentina, Jews, Gender and Sexuality in the Making of a Modern Nation, Amy Kaminsky quotes Raanan's writings about soccer as a path to Argentinity. Can you talk about these paths?
Definitely. It's a pleasure to talk about Jews and soccer.
Pasaron la pelota finalmente.
Totally, undoubtedly. Yeah. Well, Jews formed part of Argentine football or Argentine soccer from its very first days. I mean, there's no way to think about Argentine soccer without thinking about Jews. How many Argentines know, for example, that the founder, the first president, the first captain of Club River Plate was a Jewish Argentine? Very few people know. Leopoldo Bard was a Jewish Argentine, was the founder of one of the most internationally renowned football clubs of Argentina. So you had very many Jews involved in soccer in very many ways. However, once their social upward mobility started, Jews became less interested in their kids playing soccer professionally, but they continued to be members of football clubs or managers of football clubs or coaches of football club, etc. In the 1920s and 30s and even in the 1930s, you still have very many Jewish Argentines playing soccer in the leading Argentine teams. The numbers are going down, especially after World War II. But it was part of daily life, and it was part of the efforts to become Argentines, since soccer became the most popular sport in Argentina. Now, there's a very interesting story around a specific football club, Club Atlético Atlanta, which is located in the supposedly most Jewish neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Villa Crespo. Maybe I should have put my Atlanta t-shirt while speaking about this football club. Although it was not established by Jewish Argentines, its location in a neighborhood with a fairly large Jewish population had gradually created a Jewish image for this club. And indeed, for decades, most of the presidents and very many board members of Atlanta were Jewish Argentines, to such a degree that the fans of other football clubs started chanting all sorts of anti-Semitic slogans, identifying Atlanta as a Jewish club. And since I don't want to offend the feelings of some of the people watching us, I would not include some of the anti-Semitic slogans that they use, but this is true until this very day. We had such an incident exactly a year ago in March 2020, when one of the Argentine players were kicked out of his club because of anti-Semitic gestures. So Jews are an integral part of Argentine soccer. There was a very nice Argentine telenovela a few years ago called Los Graduados. And there are two families in this telenovela, which are supposed to be prototypes of porteños, of the inhabitants of Buenos Aires. And one of the families is a Jewish family. And how do we know that this is a Jewish family? Among other reasons, because the father is a fan of Atlanta, the Jewish club of Buenos Aires.
That's very interesting, and actually I had no idea about that. And my entire family is from River Plate, and I had no idea about that either.
So there you have another reason to study Yiddish that will help you with the family.
Absolutely. Let me ask you one more question, because I promise we will not stay for over an hour. The question reads, can you speak a little bit about the role of the Once neighborhood in Jewish Argentine life, and how has it changed over the last century? Not sure who wants to answer.
I'll take one literary part, but let Raanan start.
Also was the home for very many Jewish immigrants, and during various decades, very many stores, especially textile stores, were owned by Jewish Argentines. Many of the Jewish institutions were located in Once as well. This is true especially for, let's say, the first third of the 20th century. Then from the 1930s onward, Villa Crespo also started to become a destination for very many Jewish immigrants, especially from Poland. So there's a kind of a rivalry between the two neighborhoods, which is more Jewish than the other. Traditionally, Once is the Jewish quarter, the Jewish neighborhood of Argentina, but for others like myself, there's no place like Villa Crespo.
Well, you have to say that because your wife is from there, so...
That's also true, I admit this. Yeah. But when it comes to the political organizations like the Daria, when it comes to the printing houses of Jewish newspapers, it was also the Once. But in recent years, it has changed for various reasons. A, because of the entry of large immigrant groups from other countries, be they Asian countries, Koreans, for example, or neighboring Latin American countries, Paraguayans, Bolivians, etc. And among the Jews of Once, what you see is a process of becoming Orthodox Jews. So you see people of Chabad in very places in Once. In Once, you have the kosher McDonald of Argentina, etc. So the neighborhood has changed its face in a noticeable way. Yes, undoubtedly.
Very quickly, because I'm conscious, I notice what time it is. Two things. The printing press that I mentioned at the very beginning was located in Once, Sarmiento 3149, and it is now the location of Conex, if I'm not mistaken. The literary reference I wanted to make has to do with Hermann Rosenmacher or Hermann Rosenmacher, one of the greatest writers we have had. You don't have to label him as Argentine Jewish or Jewish Argentine. One of the greatest Argentine writers, and many of his stories are in fact located in Once. It so happens, because there is an order in the universe, that just this week in one of my classes, we worked on one of his stories, Blues en la Noche. A magnificent story in which there are concrete references to a Jewish neighborhood, to the streets, to what it feels to come from that area. So yes, you will find noticeably and very significant references to that neighborhood as well as to others. There has been a move from Once and Villa Crespo to the countries, los countries in that sense. But that is another story for your next broadcast program.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been a terrific program, and I hope that we can make another one in the near future, because there is still so much to discuss. Thank you both so much for being with us today, and I will give the floor now to Vanina for closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone, very, very much, specifically to Professor Raanan Rein from Tel Aviv University, Professor Saul Sosnowski from the University of Maryland, our amazing moderator, Adriana Camisar, thank you, and all our friends from B'nai B'rith International. We have people watching from Argentina, from Israel, from all around the United States. I will just mention a couple places. We have people from Florida, from Colorado, Maryland, Virginia, Boston, Louisiana, from around the world, from the UAE to Norway, Brazil, Ireland, Canada, Nigeria. So thank you everyone for joining us. There are so many more questions that we were asked. We unfortunately don't have the time, but please send us a message and we will do our best to answer them or have another panel and discussion like this one. For more events from the Embassy of Argentina, please follow the Embassy of Argentina in the United States and at ARG in USA. And for more events from the Embassy of Israel, please follow us on all our social media pages at Israel in the USA. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're now on TikTok. And we really thank you all for such an amazing program. And yes, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.